Hello, welcome to the first ever Latinx Kidlit Book Festival viewed by families and children of all ages. Please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. I am your moderator, Nonica Ramos, writer of the Disturbed Girls Dictionary, a 2019 YALSA Best Fiction for Young Adult selection, and PB writer of the forthcoming Your Mama from Versify Books, and Hair Story from Learner Books in 2021. Blessings and acknowledgments to my fellow author, Mia Garcia, for reminding me to honor the indigenous people of our nation. I'm calling in from Harrisonburg, Virginia, land home to the Monacan Nation. Bear Mountain in Amherst County has been the home of the Monacan people for more than 10,000 years. The James River Water Authority plans to build a water pump station on top of Rosawek, the Monacans' capital city, in order to save Rosawek for future generations and allow Monacan ancestors to rest in peace. JRWA must move the project to an alternative location. Go to www.monacannation.com to learn more about how to support their cause. I want to acknowledge the Taino Borican from Puerto Rico, from where my family and my ancestors originate. Despite attempted genocide and mass enslavement, the Taino have survived and thrive all across the Caribbean. Our panelists are calling in from Philadelphia, home to the Lenape Indians, original inhabitants of Delaware, New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Southern New York. They're calling from Houston, home to the Attakapas Ishak, Miami, home to the Tequesta, Taino, and the Seminole, and the Bronx, home of the Wappinger and the Munsee Lenape, who, due to forced migration, now mainly live in Oklahoma. Please check out Dr. Debbie Reese's American Indians in Children's Literature blog for further resources and the names of Indigenous authors and illustrators you can support all year round. And now onto our amazing panelists. First, we have Hilda Burgos. Hilda's parents emigrated from the Dominican Republic before she was born, and she grew up in the New York City neighborhood of Washington Heights as one of 4 sisters. She now lives with her family near Philadelphia, where she works as an attorney. Hilda's first middle grade novel, Ana Maria Reyes Does Not Live in a Castle, is an ALA 2019 Notable Children's Book and a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection. Her debut picture book, The Cot in the Living Room, illustrated by Gabby D'Alessandro, and her second middle grade novel, Miosotis Flores Never Forgets, will be published in 2021. And Maika Mulit is a Miami native, and make sure her gorgeous book is here, and the daughter of Haitian immigrants. She earned a bachelor's in marketing from Florida State University and an MBA from the University of Miami. When she's not writing stories, she's sharpening her skills as a PhD student at Howard University's Communication, Culture, and Media Studies program. Her research focuses on representation in media and its impact on marginalized groups. She's the eldest of 4 sisters and loves young adult novels, fierce female leads, and laughing. And our next panelist, Sofia Quintero. She's a writer, activist, educator, speaker, and comedian. She is also the author of Ephraim's Secret and has written several hip-hop novels under the pen name Black Artemis. This self-proclaimed Ivy League homegirl graduated from Columbia University and lives in the Bronx. And yeah, she's here. Jasmine Mendez is a poet, writer, and educator. She is the author of 2 multi-genre memoirs, including the award-winning YA memoir, Island of Dreams. Her second YA memoir, A Bucket of Dirty Water, Memories of My Girlhood, and her debut picture book, Josefina's Habichuelas, Arte Publico Press, will be released in 2021. She is an MFA graduate of the Rainier Writers Workshop at Pacific Lutheran University. Welcome, everybody, to the panel, Using Storytelling to Fight Anti-Blackness. And I'm going to start by asking my first question to Jasmine. And then after that, the panelists, we can all join in the conversation. So starting with Jasmine, Jasmine, in your memoir, Island of Dreams, you wrote, "My poetry is the revolution, and the revolution can be found only in the mind." How is your book, The Revolution, What paradigms is your book shifting, and what truths do you seek to lift up about the Black community? I'm going to pass it to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nanika, and thank you everyone that helped put this panel together, and just the festival in general. I'm very honored and excited to be here. Yeah, I wrote those words so long ago, but I definitely do. I still stand by them, and I think that my book attempts to look at being Dominican, being a Black Dominican in the South, and being raised predominantly in the South, and how different that experience might be from someone who maybe grew up in Miami, surrounded closer to more Dominicans or Latinx folks, or in Washington Heights or in New York. I was a military brat, and so I grew up all over, but predominantly in the South. I was born in Alabama, lived in Tennessee, Louisiana, and then finally Texas. I'm a Houston. I'm a Dominican in Texas, and I think that for me, it's this idea of it being a revolution in the mind is that we need to sort of my book is asking folks to change their mentality about what it means to be Black, and that there is a Black diaspora that most folks unfortunately aren't exposed to until later in life. It's not something that they necessarily see as kids in books. It's changing, right? We are part of that changing landscape. But when I began writing, and as I grew up, a young Black Dominicana in the South, it's not something I did not see myself represented in books. And I think that in order for us to change the conversation and to open ourselves up to the variety, the different Black American experiences that exist, we have to be open to that. It is in part a revolution. And I also think that we still, when oftentimes if we see a Black person speaking Spanish or any other language that's not English, right? Whether it's Haitian, French Creole, whether it's French, whether it's anything that's not English, especially here in the United States of America, we're kind of like, whoa, where are you from, or what are you, or how did that happen, or folks don't seem to process that or understand that very well. At least for me, that was my experience in the South, right? And so my book speaks to that experience and says how sort of othered I felt growing up, and still oftentimes here, especially in Texas, folks don't understand, right, what it means to be a Black Latina. And I think that my book seeks to talk about that in a way that I think students and young folks can really appreciate and see themselves and understand in that regard. So.
Thank you. Can I invite Maika to respond to the question?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the festival. But this is a really, I would say, like a large question. When I think of revolution, I think of something that encapsulates a ton of people and how you have to get everybody on the same page. And that is a lofty goal. But I think if we kind of look to ourselves as individuals, we can see like that revolution starts within us, right? How are we changing the ways that we think and the ways that we view ourselves and the world around us? But for one of the good ones, I would say the revolution or that aspect comes in helping people to realize their own, I would say shortcomings or the ways that they view certain things, particularly as it relates to allyship. So many times when people are saying, oh, this Black person is articulate, or I support LGBTQ rights, they say it in the silence of their home, or they pull the person to the side and they say, I align with you, I agree with you, you're so brave. But then when it comes time to speak up in a public setting, those same voices are so quiet. So my hope is that, the revolutionary aspect of one of the good ones will come in when folks are considering themselves. And when they say, I want to help make this world a better place for folks who are Black, folks who are queer, folks who are whatever the case may be, what does that allyship look like to you? Do you think that only certain people are worthy to be missed or worthy to be elevated? Does a person have to speak eloquently or go to the right school? You have to make sure that, they don't smoke weed, they never got in trouble when they were in school. Like, none of these things should matter. It really should be focusing on who the person is as an individual, and to realize that there's value in someone simply for them being human. But so often, especially when we are considering folks who are Black or who are any other spectrum of maybe a marginalized identity, so much of the humanity is stripped away. So I would ask, that revolution comes from you as a person to realize that you matter. You are as a person. And even if the world around you is kind of fluctuating in that belief of who is allowed to be valued or who's allowed to matter, that within yourself that you do. And that I hope, like, one of the good ones is kind of like a call to action for people to not only look introspectively, but when you're looking at folks outside of your own identities, what does that look like? Like, who are you elevating? So I really hope that, that revolutionary aspect comes through in that way.
Thank you, Maika. Can I invite Sophia to answer the question?
I'm so excited to be here with all these wonderful authors. Thank you for asking me to be a part of this. Welcome everybody to the festival and this panel. The book that I'm going to talk specifically about, even though I would hope that there's a revolutionary impulse in all my work, I'm speaking specifically about Divas Don't Yield, which I actually published in 2006 in the middle of the big chick lit trend. And there's two things to know about that. First of all, the term chick lit was often used frequently in a derogatory way to describe commercial contemporary women's fiction. So books like Sex and the City, The Devil Wears Prada, The Nanny Diaries. And many white women in the so-called literary elite trash these books as superficial and anti-feminist and very consumerist and the like. And from my perspective, while some of the critiques of the genre were valid, I also found that those critiques were actually also very anti-Black. Because if you dismiss the entire genre of chick lit as lacking in substance, you clearly have not read anything by Black, Indigenous women of color. You have not read anything by Terry McMillan. You have not read Wait to Exhale. You have not read Dirty Girl Social Club by Elisa Valdez. Both of those novels tackle very substantive issues, including race. So when I published Divas Don't Yield, many houses at the time were seeking not only to maximize the popularity of chick lit, but they were also trying to pursue the Latina reader. So you end up with something called Chica Lit. And everybody was looking for the next Dirty Girl Social Club, because you might remember that Elisa Valdez got like $425,000 in advance for the Dirty Girl Social Club, because everybody was looking for the Latina Terry McMillan. But when I pitched Divas Don't Yield, I described it as Dirty Girl Social Club meets the Motorcycle Diaries, because my story is about 4 very different Latinas who are student activists who are driving from New York City to San Francisco to attend the women's conference, each packing a little more baggage than she thought. And my intention, my very explicit intention, was to exploit the chick lit tropes as a way to raise social issues. And at the time when I published this novel, the only 2 novels that had prominent Afro-Latina characters were Dirty Girl Social Club, where one of 6 characters was Afro-Colombiana. And then the other was Feminista by the late Erica Kennedy, whose protagonist was Afro-Cuban. And what I wanted Divas to be different from those other novels was the characters are college students. I call this is a new adult novel. They're activists, and their usual preoccupations weren't with a career in a glamorous industry or brand name shoes or the pursuit of a male love interest and all the other things that usually gets associated with chick lit. Now, with respect specifically to challenging anti-Blackness, the lead in the ensemble of the 4 in Divas Don't Yield is Jackie Alvarado, who is unapologetically Black and is grappling with anti-Blackness. In particular, she's grappling with her internalized anti-Blackness. Her primary journey in the story is about overcoming the trauma of the various ways that she's experienced anti-Blackness. So it's in Jackie's efforts to confront that enables her to overcome other challenges, that allows her to create the possibility of her happy ending. So that was a radical thing to do in 2006 in a work of commercial fiction that was meant for broad readership and wasn't speaking to elite readers. And what I hope to do with my commercial fiction is for the work to be healing for anybody who who reads it. To build on Maika's point, we have to have revolutions within. And so I think that's the reason why when I wrote the story and I wrote the character of Jackie, I wanted her to start with her grappling with her own internalized anti-Blackness. And so that's how I think that particular book contributes to cultural revolution.
Thank you, Sophia. And I want to invite Hilda now to address the question.
Hi, glad to be here. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to sort of piggyback on something that Jasmine said, where, she talked about how when people see Black people speaking a different language, they think that that's unusual. And one of the things that in all of my stories, I sort of would like for people to see that, Spanish-speaking people don't look like one particular thing. It's to be from a Spanish-speaking country doesn't mean that you're a particular race. And when I wrote my picture book, The Cot in the Living Room, which comes out in 2021, I know that we're always told, not to give too many illustrator notes because the illustrator has to have creative license to do a lot of really good things with your book. And I didn't give a lot of instructions, and I'm glad I didn't because the illustrator did a beautiful job. But one thing that I requested was that I said, The Cot in the Living Room, let me just say, is about a child whose parents babysit children from the neighborhood whose families have to work the night shift. And I just said, I don't want everybody to look the same. I want this book to reflect the racial diversity of the Spanish-speaking community in Washington Heights, because it is diverse. And so that was one thing they did. Could we see the images now? So this was one image. In the center is the main character, and there's her father with one of the children that's going to be babysat, being dropped off. And can we see the other image? And so then here is the main character and her sister on either end, and in between is another girl who's being babysat. Because another thing that I pointed out was that even within the same family, we can have very different hues and we can look very different. And so I wanted to make sure that people see that, and children see that, and that they don't just think, oh yeah, you're Hispanic, therefore you must look like this. And I know that, and I also think it is kind of a regional thing, because when I'm in New York, if I'm on the subway, everybody comes up to me and speaks to me in Spanish because I look like I speak Spanish, but when I went out to California, people didn't do that. So it sort of depends on what that means. But I just want, I don't know if I call it revolutionary, but I do feel that this notion that we all look the same and that we're all part of a particular race is one that I'd like to dispel, because it's not true. Thank you.
I think you're all revolutionary. I'm going to move on to the next question. And I just want to first say appreciate you all for these answers, because as I'm listening and moderating, I'm also learning. That's the gift of being on this panel that I take for myself, the wisdom. Maika, the motif of investigation, which is so brilliantly executed in your book and is central to the plot of One of the Good Ones, is something that fascinated me. Investigation being a physical, spiritual, historic journey, an interrogation of your worst and best self, your family, your community, and the fabric of our racist society. Maika, I wanted to start with you and to ask you just to elucidate on your thoughts of the role of investigation in your work.
Yes. So this is my sister and I, Maritza. We write together. So our first book was Dear Haiti, Love Elaine. Our second is One of the Good Ones. And I don't know if it's because we're trying to unpack what legacy means, but it seems that every time we sit down to write a story, it's hard for us to look at things from only the modern day perspective. We have to go back in time. It just, we're working on our third book now, and it feels like we're going to be pulling in some history there as well. But specifically for One of the Good Ones, we knew that if we were going to be tackling just like racial injustice in the United States within a contemporary young adult novel, there was no way for us to do that without us taking a look back, because so many of the things that we are seeing now have happened before. And one of the things that I'll talk about with my family and friends and other folks is that sometimes it feels like, the United States is failing an open book test. Like, we know how we should be reacting and how we should be moving forward as a group. And yet it seems like these pockets of resistance are popping up all over the place. But in terms of one of the good ones, it's about a 17-year-old turned 18-year-old social justice activist. And she has a YouTube page, and she decides to take her digital activism live. And she ends up dying under mysterious circumstances after attending a social justice rally. And her surviving sisters embark on a journey where they commemorate their sister who passed, because she was very much a history buff. And they decide to go on this journey using the Negro Motorist Green Book as their guide to be able to go on this trip. And what was really interesting is that although they are rooted in modern day, there are parallels that happen to some of their relatives in the past who used the Negro Motorist Green Book. And we use that as a juxtaposition to show that, yes, there is progress, but there's still so much more work to be done. And really, that I would say that investigative spirit comes from just trying to understand why people are the ways that they are. Why are we the ways that we are? And Maritza and I discussed this in our author note, but our family comes from Haiti, and very often growing up, we were taught that you had to behave a certain way. First it would be like, Peisa Kapunu, this country isn't ours, so you need to make sure that you walk a certain way, you talk a certain way, you want to carry yourself in a certain way, so that way you don't get mixed up with the riffraff, right? But not realizing how when someone sees me, they don't see my Haitian identity first. They see my Blackness and then maybe my baldness. But, so it was really important for us to, as we've grown up, to move away from that and to investigate the ways in which it can be harmful within ourselves. So in one of the good ones, it's really that grappling of racial identity, but then also Kezia, one of our main characters, is a lesbian. And what does that mean when you grow up in a Christian household and your family doesn't know, and one of your siblings do and the other doesn't, and all of the things that are unpacked. So it all comes together, and it's really delving into that. And for us, it was really hard to separate the different parts of our identity. Sometimes people think we'll say, oh, we'll make this the Black book, or we'll make this the issue book, but it's none of that. It's a combination of being a woman, of being Black, of queerness, everything coming together, right? So.
Thank you, Maika. Can I invite Jasmine to respond to the question?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll piggyback on what Maika was saying with regard to, same thing, growing up Dominican, and my book talks about that as well. And my second memoir, A Bucket of Dirty Water, it looks at that further, investigates that further, this idea of my own internalized anti-Blackness stemming from this repetition growing up of, you're not Black, you're not Black, you're Dominican, you're not Black, you're Dominican, you're Latina, you're not Black. And then it's like, I'm like, wait, what? Like, as if they're mutually exclusive. And I'm constantly having this conversation online with people, right? That they are not mutually exclusive. And race is one thing, ethnicity is another. And they, I am Black and Latina. And I think that in my first book, I was really investigating just more internally and within, myself and with my family, trying to understand and navigate and figure that out. And there is work in there that is anti-Black. Like, when I look back at it, this book came out in 2013, but the poems stretch as far back as 2005, because it was a long time in the making, the poems and the essays. And so there are moments in that book that I'm embarrassed by, because I'm like, I still hadn't really come to terms with a lot of my own anti-Blackness. I hadn't healed that. I hadn't come face to face with that and made myself recognize the things that I was saying, what I was writing was inherently anti-Black. And I think that the work that I've been doing now, and I've been looking at a lot with Dominican history, more of my adult work, not necessarily my young adult work, but really investigates that. Where did this anti-Blackness come from, just within the Dominican community, on the island, and both here in the United States, and how we and our parents carry that with them, right? The dictatorship of Trujillo, and his insistence on being very anti-Haitian, though he was part Haitian himself, and being very anti-Black, and sort of the lies and the hate that he spewed, and that just sunk and embedded itself into the sort of the threads of the country that still exist today, and that I'm constantly fighting with my own people about, and saying, like, this is not okay, to say these things about African Americans, about Haitians, about Jamaicans, about anyone who is not Afro-Dominican or not, Black and Dominican. And so, I've constantly have been interrogated it within myself. I've been doing the work within myself, and been doing the investigative work with regard to history. I've really looked at a lot of Dominican history in the last about 5 years or so. And that has made itself into a lot of my writing as well. I don't think there's many things that I write about related to Dominican history that don't address that and that don't talk about it. Because like Maika said, it's not just, we can't necessarily write a book about, oh, this is this experience or that experience. Like we have intersectional identities, and therefore like our work is going to include all of those identities and all of those ideas, regardless of how people want to see them or perceive them, or say, oh, this is your book about illness, and this is your book about LGBTQ, and this is your book. It's like, no, like it's all there all the time, whether it's explicit or implicit, but it's there. And we, I don't parse those apart necessarily. Like all of that, all of me is in that work, and that history is also with me. And some of that history has been hard to come by because folks don't want to talk about it. You ask questions, especially in your family, and it's like, they close their mouths. It's like, oh, ¿para qué hablar de eso? Eso pasó hace mucho. Like, it was so long ago. Like, here's some café con leche. Like, let's talk about some, it's like, no, like, tell me the stories, And so it's definitely been a challenge to get that information, and to try to use that history in the work at times.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm going to pivot us up just a little bit. I'm going to start with a question stemming from Hilda's book. So Hilda, I'm going to address you first. In your middle grade book, Ana Marie Reyes Does Not Live in a Castle. Tia Nona is a character having her wedding in the Dominican Republic. Ana Maria asks Tia Nona, she says, why do you treat your child housekeeper like a servant, and why do you call her Cosita, which means little thing, we learn in the story, instead of her real name? How do your characters, Hilda, and confront relatives who perpetuate these oppressions like classism, anti-Blackness, and homophobia in your work?
So Ana Maria is only 11 years old, and this is a middle grade novel. And so this is very difficult for her, because her Tia Nona is someone that she respects and she loves and she really admires and looks up to her. So to see her do something that to Ana Maria seems clearly wrong was very difficult. And she just thought, well, what does this mean? Does this mean that I have to never talk to my Tia Nona again? Does this mean that I have to become like her? Like, well, what does this mean for me as an 11-year-old, who's been looking up to this person my whole life? And one of the things that I do, and then I'll also tell you a little bit about my upcoming book, Miosotis Flores Never Forgets. In that book, her grandmother is Dominican and Black, and she has raised Miosotis, and she says a lot of very anti-Black things. And Miosotis is, also 12, and she feels like, well, is it right that I hate my hair and I hate my skin because they look just like my grandmother's? Or should I be different from my grandmother? Should I be better than my grandmother? And, for both of these girls, I think one of the things that I point out from the very beginnings of these books is that they are sort of stubborn, independent thinkers. And that's a really good thing, because they can still love and respect these women who are very important in their lives and who love them and who are kind to them. And they can embrace some of the values that these women have imparted in them while rejecting others. And they don't have to, and they can be better than them. And they can try, like Ana Maria, for instance, when she talks to Tia Nona, she tries to get her to change and it doesn't seem to be working. So then she just says, well, I'm going to be better and I'm going to do differently and I'm going to befriend this girl and be kind to her. And it worked. Her aunt sort of saw her example and, made some little changes, probably not that many, because you can't really change everybody. All you can do is control yourself and be who you are. And so, so with Miosotis, that's kind of an important thing also, is that, this is her grandmother. She's old. She's had these notions her whole life, and maybe she'll never change her, but that doesn't mean she has to be like her. So that's it.
Thank you, Hilda. I completely identify with these characters and the struggle of having to confront personal, family members, and that this whole panel could be 15 panels. But with time constraints, I'm going to move to Sophia. Sophia, you said to me, I thought it was so powerful, the more things change, the more they don't. Have we made any progress in the movement against anti-Blackness? And my question, in listening to you all, because I've seen you all in panels before, I've read you, is how do we move from anti-Blackness discussions to pro-Blackness discussions? That's what I would like to see. So Sophia, please take it away.
The progress has been extremely slow. I think the recent events of very prominent Latinas saying and doing things that are anti-Black has shown that the fact that it continues to happen regardless of people's constant attempts to educate and enlighten folks about it, it continues to happen. This is a very challenging question for me because while I absolutely, of course, support the goal of moving towards pro-Blackness in our cultural work, I still don't feel we've spent far enough time doing the deep work of unpacking anti-Blackness through our stories within the Latinx communities. And honestly, I'm becoming more and more of the mind that to truly dismantle anti-Blackness, we have to divest from the very concept of Latinidad in the first place. And that's where eventually our stories must go. And that's not only just very difficult work for us as people, it's also very risky for artists. I don't want to make that seem like that's just an easy thing to do. That's a very scary thing, I believe, for the Latinx community at large, because we have been so deeply invested in the concept of Latinidad with little to show for it. And so therein lies the irony. We've gotten so little out of it, this concept that was created to categorize us by people who were oppressing us, and then to be deeply invested in it, trying to turn it around, trying to make it a platform for empowerment. And we've done that for a while with very little to show for it. It's a little scary to discard it after all this time. And that's why I noticed that there's a lot of doubling down on it. And I think it's particular, I'm gonna just use us as writers and as artists as an example. I think we could make this argument for any industry. When the rest of the world, for now, the rest of the world, and let's say the publishing industry in particular, is only now moving in its racial literacy to having some idea of who Latinx communities are. And this for them is progress. And meanwhile, progress for us would be divesting from it altogether. And so for artists, it's very risky to do that. The publishing community, where the gatekeepers are white folks who are now just starting to want to have an understanding of Latinx communities and now starting, just only beginning and still not doing the greatest job of, but only beginning to want to publish our stories, and still have not grappled with the vast diversity within our stories, for us to kind of make this real radical move forward and say, well, let's just get rid of Latinidad altogether. That's really risky for artists because their investment in Latinidad is very, very recent. And so I say all that to say is that I actually think I do want to offer at least one strategy to move us towards from anti-Blackness to pro-Blackness. And I think that one of the things that I do in my work, and I think it's a very natural impulse for me because I attribute it to being a New Yorker, particularly a Gen X New Yorker, is to focus on depicting solidarity between Latinx folks, especially Black Latinx folks, and other Black people, namely African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans. So tell those stories where we show those deep friendships, show them in love, show them in movement together, spiritual movement, cultural movement, political movement. Until I became an author and a public speaker, I didn't appreciate how strong the cross-diasporic connections, for example, in New York City between Puerto Ricans and African Americans. I thought what I saw in New York City was really common across all major US cities where there were sizable Latinx and African American populations. It wasn't until I started traveling that I started to see that how segregated the Latinx communities were from the African American community, from the Afro-Caribbean community.
And Sophia, I am no longer, I'm from everywhere and nowhere, as was said in Jasmine's book. I identified with that. But I want to stop you there because
Sure.
One, your last statements are perfect. But two, I feel the same thing that you're expressing. When I left the Bronx, I thought this isn't everywhere. These kind of connections aren't everywhere. I was shocked and actually needed therapy. It was so painful to see the lack of those connections. So I want to move to student questions. But before I do that, I want to thank every single panelist because I know and respect that I've asked you huge questions for a very small amount of time, and that I invite everybody in the audience to please go further in your investigation of these topics, read these authors' works, follow them, and get further educated to empower ourselves and to continue the revolution that starts within, and then we expect to change without. And that revolution comes with glory and it comes with pain. It's all mixed, and we're all in this, and as Sophia was saying, in solidarity together as we press forward. I want to start with the first student question, because in this journey, we have to have the youth with us. Our readers are at the forefront of this revolution. And the first question comes from Stephanie M. in 9th grade from the Bronx, New York.
Hi, my name is Stephanie, and my question is, how did writing books benefit you and the people around you?
And how about Maika? Are you good with answering?
Yes, I actually didn't know if we were supposed to just hop in. And I think that question was from Stephanie, was it? Yes. So Stephanie, really great question. I would say, speaking specifically about our first book, Dear Haiti, Love Elaine, which is this one, I think the way that it changed folks around me and my sister Maritza, who I wrote the book with, is the fact that Elaine starts this story off because she has to do an assignment about a Latin American country's revolution. And she decides to focus on Haiti because she's a little narcissistic, and she happens to be the distant relative of, I think, one of the only kings of Haiti, Henri Christophe. So I think it really, for me, I would say it helped change my world, because one of the groups that really opened their arms to embracing me and Maritza in this author journey was Las Musas. And honestly, that was the first time that, as a Haitian American, that I felt embraced by the Latinx community. I'm born and raised in Miami. And I will say that a lot of folks don't consider Haitian people Latinx. And Haitian people sometimes don't consider ourselves Latinx because we lead with our Blackness. And throughout this story, we were able to kind of unpack that a little bit. But I think really it just helps people to understand that you can be Latinx and you can be Black. You can be Latinx and not speak Spanish. And how sometimes when you delve into that history of your Blackness, as Elaine does in Dear Haiti, Love Elaine, and which helped catapult so many other Latin American revolutions through, especially with Simón Bolívar coming to Haiti and needing assistance in that way, it just gets washed away and you don't embrace that. So I think having Dear Haiti, Love Elaine really gets people to understand what the varying faces of Latinx identity are, whether or not as a Haitian person you identify that because of some past, feelings of not feeling always embraced by the Latinx community.
Thank you, Maika. I want to invite one more author to answer this question before we go on to the next one to make sure everyone has that last time to speak. Is anyone else feeling particularly passionate about this one?
I'll just say that for me, I think it's allowed individuals. A lot of folks see themselves in Island of Dreams as folks that necessarily don't feel at home anywhere. That idea of Island of Dreams is this idea that not from here, not from there. My family and I were kind of just an island on our own between the DR and the United States. And I think that not only other Latinx immigrants and Dominican immigrants saw themselves in my books, but I had an older gentleman from Germany say that he identified very greatly with my book because his family were migrants as well. And so I think that it's also shown people that not all Dominicans live in New York, and that we are everywhere. There's just pockets of us all around the United States, and that experience can be different than just all around as well.
Thank you, Jasmine. Let's go on to student question 2 from Jade C, 8th grade from the Bronx, New York.
As being a young woman of color and a writer, has that caused any challenges in your career, and how did you overcome them?
And I'll invite Sophia. Would you like to take this one?
Sure. I am loving all these questions from the Bronx. I'm very proud of my borough, and I'm still here. One of the challenges that I have, and I'm going to bring this up, given that this panel is about using our stories to combat anti-Blackness, was the anti-Blackness that I experienced from some Latinx readers. Especially my first couple of novels were feminist hip hop crime fiction, kind of like street lit. And the ones who showed me love first were African-American women, the African-American book festivals, the African-American academics who brought me to their schools to assign my book to their students and brought me in to speak to them, to talk about the stories that I was writing. And there were times when I would be in spaces with other Latinx authors, and I would feel the tension. I would feel the division. I would feel like, porque ella está escribiendo esa cosa de morena, right? Like that I was writing, by writing about hip hop and writing about women in hip hop, that I was being something that I wasn't, which was Black, right? But I am Black. And that was the way I was experiencing, even within the Latinx community, the Latinx writing community, the Latinx reading community, the Latinx publishing community, some of the anti-Blackness that I grappled with. And what I did is I went where the love was. And over time, I did find those other Latinx authors, those other Latinx festivals, those just like this one, who understood what I was trying to contribute with my stories, who embraced it, who lifted me up, and who supported me. So for me, just staying true to who I was and not trying to become something that I wasn't in order to fit in with the community that I identified with, but who didn't identify with me. So I didn't change myself up to try to fit in. I just went where I belonged, and I stayed true to my voice, true to the stories that I wanted to tell. And I gotta shout out Jasmine for being really willing to be transparent and vulnerable about her evolution around her anti-Black. We've all written things that over time we wish that, we hadn't. But the truth is, if we haven't written anything, that when we look back at it, we're not growing. So, and I think that we just need to be honest about that and show each other grace and have those conversations, and then we'll be better for it. So I just had to say that.
That was very, very healing. Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to go to question 3, and then Hilda, I'll ask you to answer that if you're comfortable with that. So the question for 3 is from Savannah, who's in 5th grade. Writing in from California. And Savannah's question was, do you use your personal experience to help you come up with ideas for your amazing books?
Thanks, Savannah, for that great question. Yes, I definitely do. Ana Maria, which I guess you've seen the book already. Yes, Ana Maria is a lot like me. She's from Washington Heights. She has 3 sisters. Her parents are from the Dominican Republic. She loves to read. And, she's kind of nerdy. She plays the piano. All those things were things that I did as a kid. The story itself is fictional because, if I had just written about my life, that would have been really boring. But I do think that you do have to sort of write what you know in order to create a, relatable characters and believable setting. And, you have to know what you're talking about. So, and then in my second book, my picture book also takes place in Washington Heights, and this kind of living my mother did used to babysit children overnight. Now the story itself, of course, is fictional, but I did draw from my life. And, and then my third book is also, the daughter of Dominican immigrants, and she actually lives here in the Philadelphia area where I live now. So I have, yes, definitely drawn from my own personal experiences in order to create my characters and my stories.
Thank you, Hilda. And as we begin to wrap up, Maika, would you like to add some words to that?
Yeah, my family's from Haiti, as I mentioned. Dear Haiti, Love Elaine was essentially the book that Maritza and I wish that we had when we were growing up. There were not very many books about Black people or even Haitian American people when we were growing up. We like to joke that a lot of the stories that we read had a lot of white girls with red hair. I don't know if that was like the diversity back then, but that was like what we read a lot of. But we absolutely will inject portions of our identity. Elaine is totally different from me, though. First off, amazing head of hair. I don't have any rocking the bald look, but also her family comes from money. We just want to tell a different story than what people think about when they think of Haiti, So it was important for us to inject our portions of our identity where we can, even in one of the good ones, although our characters are more distantly Haitian, we kind of have a moment where we talk about the reason why the United States got the Louisiana is through the Louisiana Purchase, because Napoleon had to sell off Louisiana because of the Haitian Revolution. And, we kind of inject our identity there where we can to let people know that, we've been here, we've been doing stuff. So yeah, great questions, y'all.
Thank you, Maika. And so we've got 2 minutes. Jasmine, I would love to hear 30 seconds of your wisdom before we finish up.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, both of the first 2 YA that I have are memoirs. So that it's me at different times in my life. The Island of Dreams was basically 13 to 19 snippets of that life. And the first time, it ends with the first time that I went back to the Dominican Republic and sort of being at home, but again, not being at home, and sort of that culture shock, but that joy, that weirdness that I felt being there. And then the second memoir, A Bucket of Dirty Water, looks at basically ages 9 to 13. So pre-puberty, if you will, middle grade YA. And yeah, it's all about me. And again, investigating further, growing up with anti-Blackness and growing up with and figuring out my identity as I worked through that. And I think that as Hilda said, you write what you know. And so even my characters moving forward, Josefina's Habichuelas, about a young Dominican girl and her family and their cultural traditions. And I think that it's important because, like Maika said, I grew up without having any representation in books that looked like me, that sounded like me, that had my experience. And so, like Toni Morrison says, if there's a book you want to read that hasn't been written, then you must write it. And that's what I choose to do.
You're muted, Noni.
Excuse me. Pardon me. Thank you to all the panelists, because as much as we're all smiling and having this conversation, there is emotional labor involved in talking about these type of topics. So thank you all for that contribution. Thank you everyone for attending the panel, Using the Power of Storytelling to Fight Anti-Blackness. And we invite all of you, own voices, writers, to continue this revolution with us. And the fight of ending anti-Blackness continues with everyone that's listening to this panel. Thank you.